Tony D and Little Joan just off camera, and this is, what am I going to call this? I don't know, hot take or screenwriter's rant. Anyhow, I'm going to talk to you about the Star Wars fandom again. Only this time, I want to talk about sort of the reaction, right? So now it finally seems, after eons to me, that the fandom, if you call Doomcock and Nerdrotic representatives of the fandom, or at least part of it, are finally on board that Star Wars is dead. Like, finally. And it's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming. Look, they talked about Star Wars being dead for a long time. I'm an OG fan. Back in the 70s, they were talking about, or at least the early 80s, that Lucas was already selling his own creation down the river. And they talked about how derivative it was in the beginning. They talked about how, and this is the fandom. This wasn't like other people. They talked within the fandom, within the sci-fi community at that time, when the fandom was full of actual nerds and smart people. They would talk about how, a lot of this just borrows from Lord of the Rings and the Seven Samurai. Like, is this really representative of what we want for sci-fi? And there was real discussion about, aren't there better, projects that we should prop up and, back in terms of the sci-fi-ness of it? Star Wars was always for the normies because it was such a phenomenon at the time. In 1977, when this movie dropped, the first movie dropped, it was in the theaters for almost 2 years. Now, hit movies would stay in theaters longer. And because, this is prior to the internet. So if a movie was hot, it would stay in the theaters. It would linger on. Some movies would linger on for months, like, 5-6 months. That was considered a big deal. But Star Wars was there for almost 2 years. Almost 2 years. Because that was the only place you could see it, number one. And people loved it. They loved it. They saw it again and again and again. Oh, Flash Gordon was another element. He borrowed from, they said. Oh, it's like the old serials. Oh, yeah. And, I liked it. Thought the first 3 movies were decent. But even by the third movie, people were talking about how George sold his own creation down the river for a quick buck. The Ewoks were, according to legend, originally supposed to be Wookiees. It was supposed to be the Wookiee planet on the third movie, which would have made a hell of a lot more sense. Instead, we got teddy bears and tons of merchandising. But a lot of fans forgave it. Like, it wasn't the worst send-off for a trilogy. But people were like, oh, okay, it's done. And then there was all sorts of rumors. Well, he really has 9 movies in mind. And those were the 3 middle ones. And people thought, well, maybe in 4 or 5 years we'll get the next movie. Cut to, let's see, almost 20 years later? No, it was the late 90s, the first one. And he finally comes out with something. And the first scene in a movie, basically. And again, this is where I contend the franchise was dead from this moment on. He did the scene where the characters are using some sci-fi gadget to measure midichlorians in the blood of potential Jedi. That took it out of a different realm. It was a movie franchise that was about something bigger than what you saw on the screen. There was something unknown and mystical about it. The moment they did midichlorians, that was done. It was done. And that to me was 90% of the reason why the prequels are just, to me, hot garbage. Video games, essentially. He'd been in the weeds too long, doing video games, doing the extended universe. And really, you know, a lot of fans criticize the sequels and all these Star Wars. Oh, they're not using the extended universe stuff. Oh, all the books have been written, and they completely ignore them. It's an outrage. Well, what did Lucas do? Did he incorporate the extended universe? Did he use any of that material? So, look, and I guess he used some, one could say, but Star Wars was dead a long time ago, in my view. It was done. The third movie was done. You know, it should have been done. Or maybe it should have been taken out of Lucas's hands. Maybe at that point he should have retired. I mean, he had the money to do it. There's no denying that. You know, and one has to wonder why even sign the deal. You know, Gary, who I like Gary in Nerdrotic, puts up a defense. Oh, well, you know, blame George for wanting to retire. George could have retired after, you know, the third movie. Certainly. And you know, he had tons and tons of money after that. How many millions of dollars? To sign the deal with Disney? Why? He didn't need the money. And you could say, well, nobody needs the money. Tell me what he needed the money for. The guy's basically retired now. Like, did he need the money to do another movie? Did he need the money to start a new business? Look how old he is. He's not going to start another business at his age. If he is it even going to be is it even going to be something other than to occupy his time, to sort of dip his toe in whenever he's bored? Look. And the other thing that these guys talk about in these videos is how Star Wars is dead from the fandom point of view. Oh, it's not dead from the fandom point of view. And I say this, I don't mean I'm not throwing any shade at the people I saw at the conventions, but I still see fans at the convention. They're still dressing up in Star Wars. They're still very much into it. Now, a lot of them are kind of checked out. You know, get them into a discussion with the gritty details of the characters and the shows. Yeah, they'll probably throw some criticisms of it, but they still love it and they don't care. You know, it's not really impacting them directly yet. That is a long time away. That is. And again, like, a lot of this stuff is going back to the true nerds, or whoever will be left of the nerd community when nerd chic finally goes away. You know, some of these people will continue to make costumes, make fanfic, make all this stuff just because, I don't know, they love it, I guess, or it's just something they know. You know, I heard some guys at a convention, they were talking how doing cosplay of Star Wars character was a great help for some of the veterans who had PTSD, and making their own armor was a lot of fun. And hey, look, more power to you if you want to do that. Personally, I'm done with Star Wars. Obviously, these guys are finally done. How to get the fans away from Star Wars? Complaining about it isn't going to do that anymore. You know, if anything, that probably entrenches some diehard fans that are holding on by the skin of their teeth. These guys are jerks. I got to keep watching Star Wars. It'll get better. Again, need to promote the guys who are doing new stuff. You know, George has made his money and he's done. And part of it is he made his money. At the point at which a project like Star Wars becomes that massive, it can't help to become corrupted by the money. it can't help it. There's too much at stake. There's too many people that got their hands in the cookie jar, and they want that money. You're talking millions and millions of dollars. None of them are going to take any chances. It drives the project into creative bankruptcy. And that's where it is now, I think, with Star Wars. It's absolutely creatively bankrupt because you just keep hiring people, first off, based on a bunch of trends that have nothing to do with Star Wars. Oh, she's a lesbian. She's going to bring the lesbians into Star Wars, everybody. Oh, it's so hot. So hot to have a lesbian Star Wars. They're talking about the... Gary was talking about the Acolyte in the video. This video here. Which I won't play, but... yeah, and he says everyone hates the Acolyte, and that's a good thing. Well, yes and no. I just don't think they're watching it. They've picked the part of Star Wars that they like, and they'll keep dressing up as stormtroopers or Mandalorians or whatever, just because it's kind of a fun thing to do. And I don't think Gary or Doomcock would begrudge those fans either, but I don't think you're going to get them. You're going to be able to wean them off of Star Wars by complaining about Star Wars anymore. You're just not. No matter how much, there's too much cognitive dissonance, as they say. Just like with the Marxists and a lot of politics, trying to show these guys the facts. Well, here's George Lucas voting against Nelson Peltz so he could reform the company and give you back the Star Wars you wanted. I don't think they care or understand, and even if they do, they have that cognitive, that's fine, it'll be all right. They got cool new costumes. And in fact, that's sort of what Star Wars, I think, and to some extent DC and Marvel has become. They're very aware of the cosplay aspect of all this, and they put that in the shows and movies. Back in the day, they just hired guys to make props and do stuff. They weren't thinking like in terms of merchandising or thinking like, well, we can't just let these guys keep the props. They just didn't care. It was about the show. Old Hollywood, and I'll say, 70s, 80s, it was about the show. It wasn't until later when Star Trek and Star Wars, and they went back and they realized, oh my God, there's so much money in replicating a phaser from Star Trek and selling it. We got to get in on this. So eventually, all these companies did. They now plan that out when they sign these contracts. When they put together the deal for Harry Potter, they absolutely 100% had the merchandising at least partially baked into the deal. They would want that. And even in I'm sure a bunch of projects that have failed or never really did enough business to become merchandise, that stuff's in the contract now. And that's part of the problem too. Because they control it, they're not just going to let some guy, some prop master, just come up with something that's cool for the movie. Oh, no. Come up with something that'll be cool to sell. Come up with a costume so girls will want to dress up as this character, costume designer. So they're trying to micromanage that, and you can't. That's the bottom line. You can't micromanage a phenomenon. They already had a phenomenon with Star Wars, and now they've micromanaged it, in my view, to death. One by one, aspect by aspect, they've destroyed it. Because they're trying to drain as much money out of the fandom as they can as it starts to fall apart. But the more they do that, the more it falls apart, and the more they do it to get more money. It's a very corporate way of doing things. They're exploiting all the assets they can before the entire thing falls out from under them, and they just walk away and say, okay, what's the next thing? So it's no mystery to me why this keeps happening. Hollywood is still woke. Hollywood is still wants ESG dollars. Hollywood is still huffing its own farts and going to parties where these people are players. And, you know, you can point out all day that Leslie Headland of The Alkalite was, you know, Harvey Weinstein's assistant. Apparently, Hollywood doesn't care. They want her. They won't cancel her, I guess, because she's a lesbian and because she has enough juice in Hollywood that, I don't know, maybe she's got some pictures of somebody, or maybe she knows the right people, or she's just friends with them. They're not going to cancel her. She might have to do something, or maybe after The Alkalite fails miserably and she inevitably puts up the defense of, well, it was because of all the people who are homophobic who didn't watch it and misogynists, and you got to give me season 2 and 3 and 4. And they do 2 or 3 seasons, and it's the lowest rated thing ever to air on Disney Plus, and it's widely panned. Then maybe finally they'll quietly go, well, Leslie, we're done. We've lost too much money at this point. We can't possibly renew this show. And, you know, feel free to go out into the press and tell everybody what bigots we are. But how do we turn the fan base around? How do you turn a bunch of Star Wars fans who still love this stuff? You have to start promoting the new stuff somehow. You know, you have to look at stuff and say, even compare it to Star Wars, you know. Go through the sci-fi stuff and say, hey, look, here's a great new book series and all the cool stuff that's in it. It's a little bit like Star Wars in this aspect. It's a little bit like Star Trek in this aspect, but here's all the new stuff. You know, here are some of the visuals. You probably won't have as many, but you'll have some, you know. And I know that's a lot harder. It really is, because I know from my own videos and the smaller subscriber base I have, when I put up a video about, and this is often very frustrating, if I put up a video about Star Wars, complaining about it, or about something that's very popular, you know, the video does very well. When I put up a video that has no connection to anything popular, you know, basically just my own stuff, you know, it usually isn't that popular. It's just there. You know, and I get a few hits off of it, but it's nothing like the deluge I will get talking about something that's already popular. It's just the way people are. They, you know, it's just the way the algorithm runs. Whatever's already popular, I think they call it, you know, Jordan Peterson would call it the Frito distribution. I think I'm saying that wrong. You know, the more something is successful, the more it gets, and the less the other things get. But Gary and Doomcock, they both have huge followings. They need to start mentioning the new stuff somehow. Even if that means once in a while taking a hit on your hits. These guys are big enough. You can bring 10,000. You could bring 10,000 people to me, no problem. Both of you could. It also means that you'd have to take out time of your busy day and try to read some new work by someone like me or whoever, and then try to process it, and then, you know, have a reason to promote it. I don't think they should exclusively do that, but I think they should, you know, start trying to do that. Start weaning people off of Star Wars. The only way you're going to do that is by presenting something to the Star Wars fan base that's already mad, because those are going to be the guys who are watching your videos. You know, here's something new. Here's something different. And then if you could build up another fan base, you know, maybe some of these other cosplayers and whatnot will finally go, you know, I don't know why I'm doing this. Because back in the day, you got to understand, the cosplayers, I was at a show, it was many years ago. This guy showed up in this elaborate uniform, and I just didn't recognize it at all. And, you know, I'm a geek, so I was just like, what the heck are you dressed as? And he goes, oh, this is, what was it? I guess it was Star Trek. I think it was. Or maybe it was Star Wars. I forget. It was one of those. And I completely never saw this uniform before, and whichever one it was. And he's like, "Oh no, this is from the books." He had actually gone through one of the books, and they had a detailed description of the uniform for this. It was like an alternate version. I guess it must have been Star Trek. It was like an alternate version. It wasn't Mirror Mirror. It was another one that was never made into a TV show or a movie. It was only in the books, and you know, I guess it was accurate. I don't know. I don't know. And I was like, "Wow, you really into these books?" He's like, "Oh yeah, they're great." So that to me is the true fandom. So even if you switch gears and do that and promote these other projects that aren't particularly known, some of these fans will then hopefully they're sick of dressing up as stormtroopers and Mandalorians, and they just are just craving something new, craving something they can make costumes of that would be funny, that you know maybe not everybody would recognize, but some of the geeks would recognize if the geek community at least embraced it, and it would feed into itself. Because look, everything, and I can see it already happening in horror, everything that's corporate backed, everything that's corporate owned just gets squeezed to death. If the creator isn't there, if the creator is in control of their product, I don't think you could expect much. You look at Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling's still alive. She's still very much involved in Harry Potter. That to me, and I'm not a particular fan of Harry Potter, but I would be confident, as long as she is in the mix, that it would maintain most of its quality. Now, maybe at some point she would check out or not care, or just lose it, but I don't think so. She seems very determined to maintain the level of quality of Harry Potter, and I really appreciate that, even though I don't particularly, I can't get into Harry Potter. It's okay. It's all right. So we don't have that for Star Wars, Star Trek. These guys are dead or gone or checked out or bought out or whatever. So you have to abandon them, and you should probably abandon anything like that. Look, something like Scooby-Doo. That's not the original creators at all. They're so far removed from Scooby-Doo. And you could argue, well, a lot of Scooby-Doo is pretty funny and cool. It's kind of all the same. Yeah, I guess you could say that. But when you look at the really early cartoons, to me, because I was such a huge fan, they're so awesome. And they have these elements that over the years have been changed or altered or moved, and it moved away from, to me, what it initially started as. There's all kinds of stuff like that. It has a shelf life. And when you start, you stop giving these companies your money, hopefully they'll finally get the message and move on. They probably won't for a while. And the real danger is this. They may very well fix Star Wars, Star Trek, or something one day. Doctor Who even. Doctor Who's another one. Oh, God. But they may fix them one day. Or not really fix them, but just ignore. For instance, with Doctor Who, what if they just ignored the last 2 or 3 seasons and then just brought in a new doctor and just pretend like those 2 or 3 seasons didn't exist? What if they did that? And then the shows they weren't great, but they were pretty good. They were kind of back in the format that you were used to, and you could watch them and they'd be okay. I'll tell you exactly what would happen. The fans would rave about it. Now, there'd be a bunch of woke fans. They'd be all pissed off. They're always pissed off. But I'm telling you, a bunch of the fans would come roaring back, and they would be like, oh my God, that's so good. The bar would drop kind of low because they want to like this stuff, unless they've moved on to something else. Unless it's just so unpopular that they're just completely done with it and it's just completely dead. They take DC or Marvel and suddenly start make super ultra American kind of superheroes again. Will the fans come back? Right now, they'd come roaring back. Oh my God. And they would immediately drop all those indie books that they're kind of buying now. Which is why it's a real shame indie comics are still doing a bunch of infighting. Maybe I should do a video on that next, even though I don't know too much about the details. There's so many details. But anyway, we've got to move these guys. We've got to wean these people off of Star Wars. I've been saying it for years. I mean, certainly it's since the prequel, the first prequel. I was like, the first step is walking away. And that's what I did on the prequels. I was going to the movies with my friends. We saw Lord of the Rings together. And after we came out of Phantom Menace, I was like, I'm done. What? You're not going to see the next movie with us? I go, no, I don't want to see that. Let's see something else. And, we didn't end up seeing it at all. But whatever. You got to draw the line somewhere. But the first step is to stop giving these companies your money. So anyhow, I know it's kind of similar to what I said last time, but the fandom, they get the message very, very late. And, at the end of the day, not everybody's a hardcore fan like you or me. They are mostly checked out. Sorry, blowing up on the phone. Mostly checked out. They're living their lives. They just want to have fun. And unfortunately, in the long run, they will probably be left with a lot of wasted money and time. They'll show up one day in their wacky Star Wars costume and people will be like, you're still wearing that? And they'll finally get embarrassed and be like, you know what, I'm never going to wear this again. That's when they'll finally sort of hit rock bottom in the fandom. Unfortunately, they may also leave the fandom completely and take it too personal. But, one bit of hope I saw today was a guy, he was doing Dragon Ball Z. Now, I had seen him do other stuff. Dragon Ball Z, in my mind, I think the creator just died. But, they were a little more on point, at least, with the character, you could say. I don't think Dragon Ball Z went woke or changed very much over the years. It stayed basically the same. So, that's a good run. I mean, maybe at some point they'll just, Disney will buy it and ruin that. But for now, it's good stuff. But you got to nip this problem in the bud when it happens. And the fandom should have reacted for Star Wars back in that prequel, after that first prequel, man. But they're weak, It was like, oh, I really wanted to like this. So they did. The complaints were mostly drowned out by people who go, well, come on, man, this is new Star Wars. I've waited 20 years for this. Don't ruin it for me. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about you. It was a terrible movie, in my view. Phantom Menace was, in my view, hot garbage. But Razor Fist was right. You'll be begging for that hot garbage when you see the sequels. It's true. It's true. It's a shame. Maybe it was just because Star Wars came out in the 70s when American cinema was going through a renaissance and everything was just so good that Star Wars couldn't help to be pretty damn good. At least, as a derivative product that it was, in my view. So, the bar was so high back then, Lucas couldn't help but make a halfway decent movie. But by the time the 90s rolled around, they'd loosen up a lot of the I don't know, the bars, I'll say. And he was just willing to do whatever the hell those prequels were. So, Star Wars is done, in my view. Let's move on. If you're a fan yelling at me, listen. There's plenty of other books out there. There's plenty of other TV shows. I mean, people rave about The Expanse. Go check out that. Check out anything else. There's so many sci-fi books out there. I'm trying to think one off the top of my head. I mean, you know, when you're reading any kind of work, wherever the genre, you really want to start with the classics. And you can't beat Isaac Asimov for the classics in terms of sci-fi. If you haven't read them, at least read them. You know, they haven't been made into great movies or TV shows, really, but there may be a reason for that. They may be only books. They may be kind of, you know, unadaptable. But they're classics. So read the classics. Get a good, you know, read the Forever War. That's a good one. And you'll see a lot of times what movies and TV shows are often based on, you know, without giving them any credit. Read Heinlein, you know, Starship Troopers. We were talking about that for a couple of weeks just recently. And other Heinlein books. They're classics too. Wean yourself off of Star Wars, I say. Anyhow, that's it for me. Tony D and Little Joan just off camera. I'm not going to do Hollywoke hot take today. I'm just too fried. Just fried my brain cells due to lack of sleep. But tomorrow I'm going to get nice and rested for the live stream where we do it live. See you tomorrow at 7.